Hi, my name is JFialky. I'm an attorney with Bacon Wilson in Springfield. My practice area is corporate law, commercial real estate, and institutional finance. Today we're going to speak for just a few moments about starting a new business. And generally there's two types of new businesses that can be formed. It can either be a startup business, where it's, say, perhaps an entrepreneur that's going to start up literally a business out of his or her basement or garage. It could be a couple of individuals who are getting together and perhaps merging some business ideas, or it could be an established business that's looking to develop a new product or a new division, something along those lines, a more matured business. In any of these areas that we'll talk about, business planning is probably the most important thing. Solid business plans lead to solid businesses. In fact, many businesses fail within the first 18 months. And a good reason why businesses fail is the lack of proper business planning. Business plans are extremely important from a number of different steps. One would be to ensure the fact that the business will be profitable at some point. Most businesses, no matter how developed a business plan is, will not be profitable in the first 12 to often 24 to even 36 months. In Massachusetts, we often see one of a number of types of business entities that are being formed. A very common business entity is what's known as a limited liability company, also known as an LLC. We also see what are typically known as corporations, although corporations is really an umbrella of different types of entities, which include corporations which have elected to be taxed like a partnership, a so-called S corporation. Other types of corporations known as C corporations, which is the general type of corporation that you often hear about. And some things known as professional corporations, which are relative to specific professionals like attorneys, sometimes like doctors, like accountants, etc. Choice of entity is a very important distinction because that includes both the ability of a business to be structured a certain way, what we call so-called capital or governance structure. And choice of entity is also important for tax advantages relative to how this new entity is going to be taxed for purposes of state and federal income tax. Often it is important when the choice of entity is first being analyzed to sit down with the corporate accountant as well as with the clients and understand a little bit of how the income stream is going to be generated and what the resultant tax ramifications will be prior to setting up the company so that the proper choice of entity can be selected. Another important piece that's very important to starting up a new business is understanding the sources of capital that will be available to the startup business. When we talked about a business plan, we understood that the business will not be profitable for a period of time. So the individuals or existing business that will be forming a new business will need to plan accordingly for cash flow to fund their own needs, but equally as important, the startup costs for forming the new business. Any new business, no matter how big or how small, is going to inherently have initial startup capital costs. Initial startup capital generally comes from one of two sources, so-called debt financing or so-called equity financing. Debt financing is something that we're all very familiar with, which is going to the bank and having the bank provide a loan. That said, banks may loan money in the case where there are individual guarantors that may have substantial assets that the bank could use as collateral to secure that loan. The other popular source of funding for startup companies is so-called equity financing. And that generally means that people are going to loan money to a new business by virtue of taking an equity stake in the business. We hear that in the context of venture capital companies as well as so-called angel investors, which are individuals or entities that will provide money to a startup venture, and in consideration for that financing that's being supported, will then take an equity stake and perhaps even control of the business as a way of ensuring that they will derive some benefit from their initial investment. In today's economic climate, what's interesting is that we're meeting with a lot of new clients who are forming what used to be larger companies that would require substantial, say, venture capital. But in fact, what we're seeing is that companies are starting much smaller, requiring far less startup capital. Part of the means by which they can accomplish a reduction in the amount of startup capital is by reducing their initial marketing and advertising budgets staying away from the institution of traditional marketing methods such as multimedia, and gearing more towards social networking, things like Facebook and Twitter, as ways of advertising their company's businesses. As well, because folks are starting with smaller companies and less traditional business models, it avoids often cases the need to lease office space, choosing alternatively things such as working literally out of your home. My name is JFialky with Bacon Wilson. I am a corporate attorney specializing in entrepreneurs and startup businesses. And if you are starting up a new business, I would love to hear from you and be happy to sit down and answer any questions you may have.